Cindy,
Yep.
Karina, and Jan, I believe is not present.
Okay. That's certainly a quorum to get the meeting started. And I think rather than, actually it's on our agenda, so we're going to do it. So I don't know if everybody has flags that they can do the Pledge of Allegiance to. I actually have mine from the Rotary. So why don't we follow our protocol and do our Pledge of Allegiance, and then I will turn it over to Jan for our first agenda item. So I will go ahead and get us started. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. A little awkward doing that in my basement office, but the cat appreciated it. So first up on our agenda is an update on our current COVID-19 actions. And Jan, I will turn that over to you.
So I have Amity Goss here with us today. In case you have questions, we have a specific agenda item that's about distance learning. So she's here for that. But I wanted to update you in every other way on COVID. And let me begin with a thank you. All of you for being here today. There's at least one important action that I will need from you today. But I do not need you to help me apply for a waiver. When we originally called this meeting, we thought we were calling it because we needed to apply for a waiver that Tara and I would need to have signed our names to so that we could conduct distance learning. And that was the primary holdup for distance learning up to this point. The waiver would have required us to say that we would not in any way violate any laws regarding FERPA, FAPE, IDEA. And while we would never set out to violate any laws, given how new distance learning is to us, we felt that that was a promise that was concerning to me in writing. And apparently my fellow superintendents and others across the state convinced the State Department of Education and perhaps the governor's office, I don't know, that was something that we would be unwilling collectively to sign up for. So the waiver has, as of 7 o'clock last night, we received an email from the Commissioner of Education saying that the waiver is no longer required and encouraging us to begin distance learning. This is quite a departure from the state's position a week ago when they were discouraging distance learning. So I think that says a number of things. I think that we were wise not to call this a 2-week shutdown. I think that we are probably going to see, though I know no more than anyone else, I think we're going to see a shutdown for a period of time, perhaps longer than that. We continue with our communications to families and to staff. Staff have been promised daily communications. Families have been told they would get communications at least once a week, though right now we're communicating with them every day because there's so much to communicate. We've been working with teachers. Teachers have been volunteering their time. Our 12-month clerical staff is still here, though we have been making some modifications to that and intend to respond to the recommendations that have been made to modify that even more. We're currently working with the leaders of the Secretarial Union to create some language around that. We are also working with the Teachers Union to create language. That I hope will be completed before the end of this night. And we are practically at signing point with the paraeducators about signing language for them. As you might imagine, and there are other units and other individuals that we have to enter into agreements with. As you might imagine, everyone is frightened. They're frightened for their health. They're frightened for their jobs. They're frightened that they won't receive pay. And so we are working through each group to try to ensure that they feel, comfortable that we are trying to work with them in every way possible. Staying in contact with the chief of police, who is our emergency response captain for the community, with First Selectman Fortuna. I've communicated with them at least once each day. I have also reached out to our representatives, Norm Needleman, Paul Formica, and Devin Carney, to ask them for help and support. And I'm hoping that some of the things that we've seen changed and amended in the last few days, I'm believing that they probably had something to do with that as well. And so when all this is over, my long list of thank you notes will include those people. We had our laptop and Wi-Fi hotspot give out today here at Central Office. The folks here in Central Office and the middle school manned the tents, and high school, actually. We had administrators, secretaries, IT people manning the tents and giving out laptops. We were able to put together a document that explained how these were to be used, what the risk was in putting students online, when they would be returned, et cetera, et cetera. We still have some folks that did not pick them up, and I'm going to include in my communication to families today a statement about making arrangements to come pick those up, because this, of course, is part of fair, equitable access to education, since we're going to a primarily technology-based learning experience. Our food.
Dan, I'm sorry.
Sure. Go ahead.
I'm sorry to interrupt. This is Karina, board member Karina. I'm just curious, how many laptops and Wi-Fi hotspots did you distribute, or are you scheduled to distribute?
We're scheduled to distribute 70 laptops and 25 Wi-Fi hotspots. In the situation of the laptops, we have some people who originally said they didn't need them, but when they realized that they too would be stuck at home, they realized they would need them. And so that number increased.
Thank you.
Just letting Baker, so the hotspot is just like a hotspot for families to be able to get onto Old Saybrook?
No, that allows them to get onto the internet, Eileen, so that they can access Old Saybrook's software, but it allows them to get onto the internet altogether, which is why we had to have parents sign off on a waiver explaining that they were now giving their children access to the internet. And they have to, of course, be watching over that, because that's access to the world, to the internet world.
And then where do you get the hotspots? Where did you get the hotspots from?
Well, a few weeks ago, when we realized this was coming, we ordered them from one of our vendors, and we were lucky enough to get them.
Wow, that was really proactive. Wow.
I know they're on back order. We tried to get more, and we ordered 15 more. We don't have them yet.
That's terrific. So that's for families that don't have internet access.
Right. Any other questions before I go on? Okay. So the other thing that we have been working on in my priority list that I sent to the board over the weekend, I said we'd be trying to figure out how to feed children who don't have access to food, and many of whom access free and reduced lunch. So we did it this way. We did not want to be part of offering food to all and making food to all, only to find that we weren't going to be using it and perhaps wasting food at a time when that's certainly not what we want to do. So we did a survey last night, which the board received a copy of in my update, and it was an opt-out survey. It's anonymous, so we're not violating any privacy laws, but it allowed people to say, if free and reduced, if food is served, if breakfast and lunch is served, I would not take advantage of that for my family. And we are getting those responses coming in. I'd say we're up to about 360 children who have been opted out so far. I'm going to put that back out in tonight's letter to families, so those who didn't take advantage of it last night can vote tonight. We will serve food at Goodwin School and the high school outside. We're hoping to start Friday. Maybe sooner, but certainly by Friday. We did get our waiver approved by the state of Connecticut. We had to have a waiver go through so that we would be allowed to serve food at what they call remote sites. And that has been approved. I received that this afternoon. So we put together, Maureen Nuzzo, Julie Pendleton put together a standard operating procedures for Old Saybrook Food Services grab-and-go meals. Have been sent to the chief of police as the emergency response person for the emergency manager, rather, for the town, and to Scott Martinson at CRAD, the Connecticut Region Health Area District, for review. I know they made a few minor amendments. So people will be handing out food with gloves. They will have masks on. They've asked that these people have their temperatures taken before they be allowed to prepare or serve food. And we're asking people who have symptoms, flu-like symptoms, to not come to the remote site to pick up any food. Most of our communications inviting people to do things say, please don't come if you have any symptoms. So I think that pretty much brings you up to speed on our planning. I'm looking to Amity, Goss, and Trent to see if I've forgotten anything. Those were the completion of my notes until we start talking about the particulars of distance learning, which I'm going to ask Amity, who has been working with the instructional leadership team and the district leadership team to pull together a distance learning plan. And actually, the work for this began last week while teachers were still here. We switched quickly from a regular professional development 2 days, and we canceled all kinds of activities and moved into let's all learn Google Classroom and how to get online. And fortunately, we were at a point where about 50%, little less than 50% of our teachers were already using Google Classroom, and there were enough of them to teach their colleagues how to use Google Classroom. So very important 12 hours of time on Thursday and Friday, or even less, that really made a difference in how we can proceed. So before I turn it over, well, actually, I think that's another agenda item, so I'll turn it back to the board chair.
Oh, great. Thanks, Jan. Before we move on to the next agenda item, does anybody else have any questions or concerns that you'd like to bring up in regards to the update that Jan just provided us?
I mean, Baker, just a question. So for the pickup for food, anybody can come. You don't have to be on free and reduced lunch.
You don't have to be on free and reduced lunch. We just did the survey to make sure we wouldn't be providing food or preparing food for folks who didn't need it. We have about remember, we have about a 26% free and reduced lunch rate in this town, in our community, well, in our schools. And we wanted to be sure that those folks would have access, and anyone else who felt that they were in a new situation where they wouldn't have access, they too would have access.
Okay.
Thanks, Eileen. Other questions? Okay. Oh, go ahead.
This is George. But just a quick question and also a comment. I'll do the comment first. And phenomenal presentation in summary, and just also phenomenal preparation. And so just piggybacking on Eileen's comment and on the food. Since it's an opt-out, and at this point you've had 360 people opt out, or families opt out. I'm not sure if they say families or students, but nevertheless, it feels like a lot of people have not opted out. And so, is the current plan to actually make meals for the remainder?
Well, I asked that question of Maureen Nuzzo early on in the process. We were trying to decide the best way to make this happen. She said that what she typically does is, because something like this happens in the summer here where food is provided, and we work with other agencies to provide food for children at Goodwin in particular and other places. We talked about how she would prepare, how she would know what to prepare. So this may give her a starting point. And again, I'm going to put it out tonight in case anyone didn't get to it last night. Then she will adjust accordingly based on usage. So, you know, like a restaurant, she'll determine is the usage going up or down, and then change her plans accordingly.
Great. Thanks very much.
So so they're giving out food once a week or every day?
Every day for very short hours, because we'll call food service people in to prepare, and then those same people will distribute. And I believe it's 9 to, you know what, I'm loath to say, but it's in the mid-morning each day.
Okay.
Monday through Friday
At Goodwin School,
at Goodwin and at the high school,
as long as schools are closed.
as long as schools are closed at this point. That is the plan.
Okay, and you have enough volunteers to help?
We actually will bring in trained food service workers. That's a requirement of the plan. Because they have all the food safety legislation, plus there are employees. And so we will hold them to the additional standard of making sure that they're healthy enough to be, serving food.
Yes, I just didn't know if you needed anybody to, give out food if people are driving by and you'd want to give them something, because I could be helpful if that's something you need people.
Oh, thank you very much, Eileen. I appreciate that. I think right now we are in good shape. I think we have people who want to do that work.
Okay, super.
Okay. I guess last call for questions before we move on to our next topic. All right. So the next topic is COVID-19 waiver application for distance learning. So I'll turn it back over to you, Jan.
Okay. So I'm going to slightly modify this one because, as I said, the waiver application isn't necessary. So I'm going to ask Amity Goss, Director of Curriculum Instruction and Assessment, to give an update on the distance learning plan before I ask to come back and talk about the last topic there, the MOU. So if you don't mind, I'll turn it over to Amity.
Hi, everybody. We are currently in a state of providing supplemental learning opportunities for students. So they're completely optional. It's sort of like summer packets or summer reading. And students can go online and access things that their teachers have populated in Google Classrooms, but completely on an optional voluntary basis. We may move to a distance learning situation, which would be counted for school days, attendance would be taken, and there would be a minimum expectation of number of hours of both learning that we were providing and assignments that students were engaging in. So we are working on creating exactly what those expectations are so that we can share them with everybody. But at that point, we would be working in Google Classrooms on a more regular basis with groups of teachers working together to make sure that any student was participating for approximately 4 hours each day. And that number is subject to change, but that's sort of a guideline for us right now. This would be all students pre-K through 12. And so there are a large variety of activities that we're looking at. We're looking at some online subscriptions where we had student data privacy contracts already, and then we can expand those for free because of the situation. We're looking at creating some options that way with some of our stronger software bases. But other than that, it's a situation where teachers have been amazing and they've rallied together and a bunch of resources. A group of teachers from Old Saybrook participated in a regional opportunity last Wednesday at Learn. They were amazing. They went in and they co-created assignments for students that we're using as supplemental learning at this point that were just project-based and rich and interesting and long-term. And it was exciting to see sort of a whole group of people who love writing curriculum and thinking of teaching and learning together in the same room, making some really good stuff for kids. And actually Learn has shared that out regionally. I think that's very much the update. There's not a lot other than we're working really hard to populate classrooms and to be ready should we be able to go to distance learning.
Are there samples as to what was sent to students like, K-12, or if there's packets that are sent home through the, computer, or how that works?
Every individual teacher had the option to populate his or her Google Classroom on his or her own. So we don't have one thing that like a grade level would be doing. But those regional resources are something that we could share out because I know that Learn has shared them out with families that document directly. So we can share that out with you.
It would just be interesting to know what's been sent to students to do and, as a framework to keep them actively involved.
it really is largely dependent on the individual teacher. They did a lot of collaboration, so it's not as though everyone is different. But the idea is that it really is to sort of extend the learning that was going on in their classrooms. So it is as personalized as our everyday instruction.
Very personalized.
Yes.
Hi, Amity.
Hi, Amity. It's Cindy Soltini, board member. How are you?
Hello.
So my question, I guess, to you is you do not have a date to launch the full on, learning day, like the day that it's actually going to start as a school day where the whole online learning platform begins. So none of these days count right now until you launch that, correct?
Well, that's an interesting question, Cindy. We
I'm in the midst of it right now. That's why I asked.
I know we all are, and we're all looking for clarification. I'm missing another update conversation right now. We're calling phone meetings so quickly across the state and so frequently to get things straightened out. My understanding is the Commissioner of Education intends to have another statewide phone meeting, hopefully Thursday, because his last letter that came out last night said, you no longer need the waiver, get distance learning started as soon as possible.
Right.
And so we were waiting for that. Now we weren't doing nothing, as you know, from my communications.
Right.
We were doing a lot, but we were not ready to hit the go button until we knew that that was going to be cleared. The second piece, which was dependent upon the waiver, was the memorandum of understanding that needs to be created with the teachers union in order for them to participate in teaching this way. So we have that. That'll be actually part of the next agenda item. But we have that in place now, ready to go, but it needs to be signed by the board and by the union. And I believe the union is currently in the process of taking an electronic vote as we speak. So those were the big impediments that needed to be moved out of the way. Once they are moved out of the way, we want to do a little bit more careful research about our special education students and services being provided to them. Lots of work, and I probably should have included this in my update, lots of work has been done there, including the purchasing of phones to allow social workers, psychologists, guidance counselors to work with students remotely. Occupational therapists, physical therapists, and speech pathologists are working on ways to deliver services. So those things need to be fine-tuned, focused a little bit more. We've been working on them. Those individuals, those teachers, those staff members have been working on these plans, but we decided to get 3/4 of the way down the road and then stop and wait and see. And it looks like at this point, we are going to be in the clear, I hope. I don't want to count my chickens before they hatch, but it looks like we're going to be in the clear with those big impediments and be able to really move forward. So while I'm reluctant to say a day or date, I think it's sooner rather than later that we will begin distance learning in earnest.
Our teachers are ready to
Great,
go.
thank you.
Our teachers.
Yeah, I'm sorry, there's huge ramifications in terms of PPPs and the type of service delivery and meeting the needs of all students. So it gets quite complicated and it changes often. So.
The federal government and the state government, and I don't want to misquote them here, but they have gone from a position of everything has to be exactly as it was when schools were open to it needs to be equal to what others are getting, to you need to do your very best to deliver. So the language is changing as we go. Unfortunately, we have not seen that definitive statement that says, here is the state's position, here is the federal government's position on this matter. And I really would be most comfortable if the U.S. Department of Education and the State Department of Education came out with a written statement saying this is our expectation of school districts. I'm sure that they are struggling with the same thing we are struggling with, which is how do you make that happen? How do you roll back legislation and not expose people to not being educated properly? Because obviously nobody wants to do that. So it's tricky, and it's interesting because we're running really fast and then coming up to the finish line and stopping and not crossing it until we know that we're safe to cross it.
Jan, this is Karen. Question: do you think that our special ed teachers, specifically with the preschool or more hands-on role, getting involved with the special ed students?
I'm sorry,
I know the
Karen,
therapists, things like that, but
I couldn't understand you, Karen. I'm sorry.
that's okay. I'm just wondering if the actual special ed teachers would have to have a more hands-on role, reaching out to the special ed students to be able to fulfill their IEPs and PPPs as best as possible.
So it will be highly personalized and differentiated for each child on their case management group. So we know that case managers, special ed teachers, and in case of 504, that could be counselors or others. We know that they have highly individualized plans that they will need to work through with children and with their families. Mrs. Bai was commenting on how much work is already being done, how many ideas are being shared by all of those different staff members with different titles, special ed, OT, PT, but that they have been coming up with creative ways. And we, for our part, are just trying to find systems for them to do that work. Can they use FaceTime? Is that student data privacy compliant? Can they use, a Google chat room? Can they use, and we're not sure any of these things are legal viable options, but they certainly would make their work much easier.
Right.
Well,
Thank you.
And if I may, it's Cindy, I'll jump in. We've just had an expectation given, me as a social worker working in a district, to make an attempt to have meetings 50% of the time. I don't know if that'll change again, but there are lots of calls to be made to parents to get agreement and get their agreement to have that, and recognize that there'll be other people in that group. So there's lots of big changes coming in regards to that.
Absolutely. We know that the safest way to address FERPA issues, and FERPA is, of course, the student privacy. It's the education version of HIPAA for the non-educators. We know that FERPA we can get permission from parents to have less privacy. That's not a very complex way to describe it, but you know what I mean. That's the safest thing to do, and that's actually something that the board's attorney and I had talked about over the last few days, so that if you wanted to run something and you couldn't be certain that there was no one else in the room, at least you would have that level of privacy. I think it's also as simple as saying things like, I'm Mrs. So-and-so, I'm working with student X, and there's no one else available in the room, right? And if there's a parent in the room, great. But, I want to know that. I think it's fair that all parties know who's listening in on a conversation. So all these things still in progress, still being worked out. We certainly will work with the board attorney and the legal counsel that we're getting from the higher ups at the State Department to make it happen. Lots and lots of details and nitty gritty. And the thing about hitting the button to go on distance learning, if we're not certain that we feel comfortable about our special education, is that really is concerning and sets us up for some claims that we don't want to be involved in, like civil rights claims.
This is Ellen Baker. I think it's really complicated for special education in terms of accessing students directly, just even to let them know that to say hello, but to start doing that through sort of telecommunication, that's a challenge.
It is.
It's not anything that you have a group, because we're dealing with students not being together.
Right.
And so that's a whole other conversation in terms of, even clarity of internet. So that's a different kind of experience, I would think, and I think it's a challenge. I wanted just to mention that I appreciate the fact that you didn't bring staff in when you close schools, that you close the school because staff are just as vulnerable to this particular virus?
To be clear, yes, we did not bring teachers in. To be clear, our 12-month employees are here, but we are practicing social distancing. Our custodians are going through the offices starting last night. They go through all the offices and they have a fogger, and they have been spraying all surfaces with antibacterial. And as long as we continue to work in our offices, they will continue to do that.
Jan, I have a question. This is Karen. What would distance learning look like for at-risk or 18 to 21 population?
That also will be highly individualized. Fortunately, the student to teacher ratio for that population is very low, which would allow teachers to more successfully individualize learning with them.
Still a challenge.
Yes.
But just know what the life skills, those sorts of things are hands-on,
Yes.
going to the store and
Yes.
all of that.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, those will need to be modified significantly to match the CDC. Well, now it's the federal government telling us what to do, as well as the state government. So we will have to modify in accordance with the information that we're receiving from them and the guidance that we're receiving from them. But where a door closes, another one opens. There are a lot of creative things that we can do when we're stripped of other opportunities. Not the least of which is maybe time to get back in touch with nature. Maybe time to learn something about the environment around our homes and in our places where we can be a little bit more isolated. And so I believe that our teachers will come up with some very creative ways to work with students, and it will be modified. And to be completely honest, it will be bumpy at first, but we will give it our best effort and we will continue to improve at it. What we are unwilling to do is go ahead and hit go without knowing that we are ready, not perfect, but ready to educate all of our students.
This is George Chang. Just a clarification question for Amity.
Yes.
And so, Amity, when you presented, you made the distinction of calling what you guys are planning to do supplemental learning, and Jan is, her plans are using the term distance learning. And one of the emails that Jan has sent out, she put out a distinct table showing distinct differences between supplemental learning and distance learning. I just want to get some clarification on: are we going towards the philosophy of a supplemental learning or towards the philosophy of a distance learning?
I think that's a changing prospect. So a supplemental learning plan is
I'm so sorry, I can't hear very well. Go ahead.
what we're working with right now is a supplemental learning plan. And that is, that's that optional level. That's when we're not counting school days. So this is like a snow day and something that we would send home with students so that they could be engaged in learning during a snow day. But then what we hope to be able to go to is a distance learning plan, which actually goes by a number of names. I think they were calling them interim learning opportunities yesterday. But that is when you start to actually count the school days and you take attendance and you really try to provide at least a significant portion of the school days worth of assignments and interaction for students.
George,
I see. So if I can understand this correctly, then, so are we saying that the supplemental learning is already in place, and the plan is to eventually get to distance learning once all the ducks are in a row?
Yes, you captured it exactly.
Very good. Thank you so much.
George, I apologize if you did not get my communication last night, or perhaps because of your schedule, didn't get a chance to read it. But it does have a table in it with supplemental explained on one side and distance learning explained on the other side, because we know that those two terms are confusing people.
No, I have that in front of me right now, and that's the reason why I asked, because I just need a clarification in terms of where we are now and where we're going, and I think Amity just described it perfectly. So thank you. I'm good to go.
Thank you.
And so, Jan, I've been following your emails. Did that come The last email I had received was something about not needing to sign the waiver.
Yeah, that went just to the board and to the district leadership team. I wanted you to know that there'd be a slight change to today's meeting agenda. And I wanted the district leadership team to know that they could stop pulling their hair out and being anxious about that. But that did not go out to the public, because I don't even know that the general public would even know that that's something we were waiting for.
No. I was asking for the other email that you indicated was differentiating between supplemental learning and distance learning, and I didn't know where that was. Is that still in your communications? Because I've been checking all your emails.
Yes, that went out prior to the waiver email yesterday evening, maybe, I don't know, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock.
So Jan, if I can just add in, Eileen, check email from Jan, sent Monday at 6:48.
Okay.
And it's called School Closure Update number 2.
Okay, I have that actually, school closure number 2.
Yep, to families in English.
Yep. Okay, so maybe it's like opening that attachment.
No, you should just hit scroll down.
Yep, I see it, and then it basically talks about parents and guardians, and I will continue to check.
And I apologize, everyone. I was working off of a previous agenda, so I kind of skipped our first bullet, and we'll come back to that once we finish up with this. So other questions for Jan and Amity in regards to distance learning?
Yeah, this is Karen. It's just really a comment. And I know you all are working incredibly hard trying to match all of this, and there's still so many loose ends and unknowns. I am concerned about the number of days we're losing, so I hope we can, kind of iron out the special ed piece for the distance learning for the entire student body. Again, there's so many factors to consider, and we may not even be back in school by April vacation at this point. We don't know that, I know, but I again, especially in light of the incredibly mild winter we have, I'm imagining late June could be unbearably uncomfortable in the classrooms. And again, I know we may not have any control over that, but hopefully we can at least institute the distance learning as soon as possible, which I know is your goal, barring recovering ourselves from liability and all of that, just so we can start counting these days.
Yeah, and I think we share, obviously, Karen, we share the same goal. And I think that we are awaiting clarification about that June 30th date, because there was some mention yesterday. Again, things are moving fast for the state too. But there was some mention yesterday that we may be able to end earlier than that. And I'm not going to say any more because I don't want to overpromise and underdeliver, but it's just another loose end. We're not quite sure where the state is on that June 30th now. Originally, they said you have to go to June 30th and you have to use April vacation. Then they backed off the April vacation, and now they seem to be changing their stance on the June 30th. So more to come on that.
Yeah, I mean, April vacation is a month away, and I don't know if we're still going to be in lockdown, basically. So we'll see.
Right.
Yeah.
Other questions on this topic?
I'll just interject. This is Cindy, board member. Just if anybody needed any guidance, clarification, or any help, I'm going to be in the midst of doing this learning starting Thursday. So any questions for me or anything, I would be happy to help in any regard because I'm going to be doing it.
Thank you. Actually, Mrs. Bai is trying to work out the details of some of these things for that department, and so she may very well want to reach out to you.
Feel free to tell Kathy that she can reach out to me anytime.
Thank you.
Cindy, what's your phone number? Because I may need some help getting to Google Classroom.
Let's, I just want to put a pin in that and not do that on the audio call.
Okay. No, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I can send it to you, Eileen.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks. Okay. So with that, let's circle back to our first agenda item, and I apologize, Jan. in my disorganization today. I was working off an old copy of our agenda. But our next agenda topic is discussing empowering the superintendent to enter into MOUs with personnel during the declared state of emergency.
So I'm asking the Board of Education to give me permission to enter into MOUs with our various unions and enter into amendments to working conditions for our individual employees so that I can respond to federal, state, and local directives, and also so I can make good decisions for our employees without having to call Board of Education meetings. So sitting on my desk, and I'll tell you why I'm asking for this. I'm sure it's apparent to you, but I want to explain it since this is a public meeting. I'm in the very end of creating a memorandum of understanding with our para educators, and I'm almost at the end of negotiations to create a memorandum of understanding with our teachers, which, as we described earlier, is really, really essential for us to progress. We have other units, secretaries, custodians. We have individual staff members. We have nurses. And so all of them, as I said, are concerned about how will they get paid? Will they get paid? Should they be accessing unemployment benefits? And so what makes it hard for us to do what we typically do as a board, which is we go into an executive session, you hear about the details of a negotiation, and then we come out and you support or you vote for or against the presentation. We can't really hold an executive session remotely, and we can't gather as a group. So I know my colleagues across the state are doing something similar, are just asking that for the duration of this emergency situation, that you allow me to sign these memorandums of understanding to move things forward. Of course, I will do this with the advice and counsel of the board's attorney. So she'll be involved all the time. That would be Rebecca Santiago right now. And so that the best interests of the board are always kept in mind.
So Dan, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I was going to actually put the motion on the table, but go ahead.
Yeah, that was actually what my question was, is, Dan, would we do this via motion, and would you just do a roll call through everybody who's present to ask if they vote for or against?
Yeah, I think that would be the best way to proceed. We can do the roll call once a motion is put on the table, and that would allow me to proceed with this.
Okay. Questions, comments, or anyone interested in making a motion to approve empowering the superintendent to enter into memorandums of understanding with personnel during the declared state of emergency?
I'll make a motion. Eileen Baker.
Second, Karen Broder.
Julia seconds it.
Okay, we have 2 seconds there, but I'm happy to take both of them. Okay, so all in favor, we're going to go through a roll call. And I'll go through the roll. Jan, I think I've got everybody's name down.
Chairwoman
we'll
Burrows,
go through. Go ahead.
Do you want to see if there's any further discussion?
Yeah. Yep. I'm happy to do that. So further discussion, questions, people?
I don't have a further discussion. I think that Dan's been very comprehensive in keeping us in the loop on all conversations that she has with anyone that would be helpful as it pertains to Saybrook Public Schools.
I agree. And, just anecdotally, and I think, Eileen, you're probably on this distro. Kate had set up a distro for the board chairs. And I know this was a question that had come up, and other board chairs were kind of in agreement about how their districts were handling it. So I don't believe we're in any uncharted territory here.
Mm-hmm.
Are there questions or concerns, comments before we take a vote? All right, then. So I'll start with Karina Julius.
I'm in favor.
Okay. George Chang.
In favor?
Karen Broder.
In favor.
Eileen Baker.
In favor.
Cindy Saltini.
In favor.
And this is Tara Barrows, the board chair. I also vote for. Did I miss anyone, Jan?
I'm sorry?
Jim is here.
Jim.
Oh, I'm sorry, Jim. And
That's okay. I vote in favor,
Jim Henderson.
regardless of what you say.
Jim, no, you get a vote, Jim. I'm sorry.
Oh, thanks.
Thank you. And did I miss anyone else? All right, so I believe that the ayes have it. Jan, motion passes.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. And we will, we'll move forward to make this go as smoothly as possible for everybody during tough times.
Okay, so with that, unless we've got any additions to the agenda, we do have a board meeting on the 24th, but I would say stand by for updates on that agenda and how we'll conduct that meeting. And obviously, you know, the rest of the district events, you know, are on pause until further notice. And with that, can we get a motion for adjournment?
Moved.
Moved by Eileen. Do you have a second?
I'll second it.
Second by Cindy. And I think we can all just say, all in favor, aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, so moved. So thank you all for joining the call. I really appreciate it. And Jan, obviously, thank you to you and Amity and Trent for hosting.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
Stay healthy, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.
Thank you. Thanks so much.